When a desperate spinster marries a sickly Appalachian stranger for his fertile lands, their wedding night reveals a dark secret that will force her to choose between the security she's always craved and the truth that could destroy everything she's built. The metallic taste of blood fills Martha Caldwell's mouth as she presses her fingers to her split lip, the copper tang mixing with the bitter aftertaste of laudanum that still clings to her husband's breath. The wedding dress, her mother's yellowed silk, altered 3 times over the years for ceremonies that never came, lies torn across the rough-hewn floorboards of the cabin, its pearl buttons scattered like fallen teeth in the lamplight. But it's not the violence that makes her hands shake as she sits on the edge of the marriage bed. It's the sound she heard just before Thomas Whitmore collapsed into his drugged stupor. A woman's voice, soft and pleading, coming from somewhere beneath the cabin floor. A voice that whispered a single word that now echoes in Martha's mind like a death knell. Help. The year is 1883. And in the remote valleys of eastern Kentucky, where the Appalachian mountains rise like ancient guardians against a star-drunk sky, such sounds carry meanings that civilized folk prefer not to contemplate. Martha pulls a quilt around her shoulders, the rough wool scratching against skin that bears fresh bruises, and listens to the silence that has swallowed that desperate plea. Outside, the wind carries the scent of approaching winter through gaps in the cabin's chinking, but inside the air holds something else, the sweet, cloying smell of decay that seems to seep from the very walls. Martha has lived 34 years without a husband, enduring the whispers and pitying glances of a town that measures a woman's worth by her ability to secure a man's protection. But now, in this moment, she wonders if some fates are worse than spinsterhood. 3 months earlier, Martha had stood in the parlor of her family's failing farm, listening to her brother Samuel explain why marriage to a stranger was her only salvation. The drought had lasted 2 seasons. The bank was demanding payment on loans that had seemed manageable when the rains still came, and Samuel's own family needed every acre they could save. Thomas Whitmore owns 800 acres of the richest bottomland in 3 counties, Samuel had said, his voice carrying the weight of a man who'd run out of options. He's willing to marry you sight unseen, Martha. All he asks is that you come to Kentucky and help him work the land. The letter from Whitmore had been brief and businesslike, written in a careful hand that spoke of education despite the remote address. He was 38, he claimed, a widower whose first wife had died in childbirth. He suffered from a lung ailment that limited his physical capabilities but left his mind sharp and his need for companionship acute. The marriage would be one of convenience and mutual benefit, her domestic skills in exchange for security and a home of her own. What about love? Martha had asked, though even as the words left her lips, she knew how naive they sounded. Samuel's laugh had been bitter. Love is a luxury for women who have choices, Martha. You're 34 years old with no prospects and no dowry. This man is offering you a chance at a life that doesn't depend on charity or the kindness of relatives who can barely feed their own families. The wedding had taken place by proxy, with Samuel standing in for the absent groom and a circuit preacher performing the ceremony in the parlor where Martha had spent so many evenings wondering if she would die an old maid. The ring, a simple gold band that fit too loosely on her finger, had arrived with the train ticket and enough money for traveling clothes. Now, sitting in the cabin that is supposed to be her new home, Martha understands that some bargains exact a price that can't be calculated in acres or dollars. Dawn comes slowly to the mountain valley, filtered through mist that clings to the hollows like smoke from some ancient fire. Martha wakes alone, Thomas having disappeared some time before sunrise, leaving only the lingering smell of laudanum and something else, something medicinal and sharp that makes her nose wrinkle with distaste. She dresses carefully, her movements stiff from the previous night's violence, and begins to explore the cabin that is now her home. The main room is spartanly furnished but clean, with a stone fireplace that dominates one wall and shelves lined with books that speak of education and refinement. But it's the kitchen that yields the first concrete clue to the mystery that has taken root in her mind. Hidden behind a loose board in the pantry wall, Martha finds a collection of items that makes her blood run cold. Women's jewelry, rings, brooches, a delicate gold locket, all tarnished with age and neglect. But more disturbing are the personal items. A hairbrush with long auburn strands still tangled in its bristles, A small mirror with a crack that runs like a lightning bolt across its surface, and a diary bound in cracked leather. The diary's pages are filled with a woman's careful script, the entries dating back 5 years. The name on the first page makes Martha's hands tremble. Property of Elizabeth Whitmore, beloved wife of Thomas. June 15, 1878. Thomas grows stranger each day. The medicine he takes for his lungs makes him violent, unpredictable. I fear for my safety, but where can I go? The nearest neighbor is 10 miles through mountain passes that would kill a woman traveling alone. July 3, 1878. Found another grave marker in the woods behind the cabin. That makes 4 now. All women's names, all recent dates. When I asked Thomas about them, he flew into a rage and struck me. I must find a way to leave this place. July 20th, 1878. Thomas speaks of getting another wife when I'm gone. He says the land needs a woman's touch, but I think he means something darker. God help whoever comes after me. The final entry is dated July 25th, 1878, 5 years ago. Martha closes the diary with shaking hands, understanding now why Thomas Whitmore had been so eager to marry a stranger, why he'd been willing to pay for her passage and ask no questions about her past. She is not his second wife. She is the latest in a series of women who have disappeared into this remote valley, drawn by promises of security and trapped by isolation and violence. The sound of Thomas's return sends Martha scrambling to hide the diary and jewelry, but not before she notices something that makes her stomach clench with fresh terror. The locket, when opened, contains a miniature portrait of a woman who could be Martha's twin. The same dark hair, the same angular features, the same desperate eyes that have stared back at her from mirrors for 34 years. Thomas enters the cabin moving with the careful gait of a man whose body betrays him daily. But his eyes are sharp and alert as they survey the kitchen. He's dressed in clean clothes and carries himself with the bearing of a gentleman. But Martha can see the calculation behind his polite smile. I trust you slept well, my dear, he says, his voice carrying the cultured accent of someone educated beyond his circumstances. I apologize for my indisposition last night. The medicine I take sometimes affects my behavior in ways I find regrettable. Martha forces herself to meet his gaze. Of course, I understand that illness can be challenging. Indeed. Thomas moves to the stove, where coffee has been warming since dawn. I thought perhaps you'd like to see the property today. 800 acres of the finest farmland in Kentucky, all of it yours now by right of marriage. The tour that follows is a masterclass in manipulation disguised as hospitality. Thomas shows her fields rich with corn and tobacco, pastures where cattle graze contentedly, and orchards heavy with fruit that will bring good prices at market. But Martha's attention is drawn to the details he doesn't mention. The fresh-turned earth in the woods behind the cabin, the cellar door that's secured with a lock that seems unnecessarily heavy, and the way Thomas's hand never strays far from the pistol at his hip. The previous Mrs. Whitmore, Martha says carefully as they walk through a garden that shows signs of recent neglect. What was she like? Thomas's step falters almost imperceptibly. Elizabeth was delicate. The mountain air didn't agree with her constitution. She passed away in her sleep, poor thing. Very peaceful. But Martha has read Elizabeth's diary, has seen the fear that grew with each entry, and she knows that whatever happened to Thomas's previous wife, it was anything but peaceful. The nearest town is Millfield, a collection of weathered buildings clustered around a crossroads where mountain trails converge like the spokes of a broken wheel. Martha makes the journey alone, claiming a need for supplies while Thomas tends to business in the fields. But her real purpose is to seek help from whatever law enforcement exists in this remote corner of Kentucky. Sheriff Ezra Hawkins is a man carved from mountain stone, his face weathered by decades of dealing with the kind of violence that flourishes in places where civilization's reach grows thin. His office occupies a corner of the general store, and he listens to Martha's carefully worded concerns with the patience of someone who has heard similar stories before. Mrs. Whitmore, he says when she finishes speaking, I understand that marriage to a stranger can be unsettling, but Thomas Whitmore is a respected member of this community. He pays his taxes, keeps to himself, and causes no trouble in town. What about his previous wives? Martha asks, her voice barely above a whisper. Hawkins's expression doesn't change, but something flickers behind his eyes, a knowledge that he's not willing to share. Mountain life is hard on women, Mrs. Whitmore. The isolation, the harsh winters, the distance from medical care. It's not uncommon for wives to struggle with the adjustment. How many wives has he had? That's not really your concern, is it? Hawkins's voice carries a warning now. You're his wife now, legally and properly married. My advice would be to focus on making the best of your situation, rather than dwelling on matters that don't concern you. But as Martha prepares to leave, Hawkins adds something that chills her to the bone. Of course, if you were to decide that mountain life doesn't suit you, well, accidents do happen on these trails, especially to women who don't know the country well enough to travel safely. The threat is delivered with the same casual tone he might use to comment on the weather, but Martha understands its meaning perfectly. She is trapped not just by her marriage to Thomas, but by a conspiracy of silence that extends throughout the community. Whatever has happened to Thomas's previous wives, the local authorities have no intention of investigating or preventing it from happening again. That night, while Thomas sleeps off another dose of laudanum, Martha searches the cabin with the systematic thoroughness of someone whose life depends on finding answers. The cellar door that had caught her attention during the tour is secured with a lock that resists her attempts to open it, but the floorboards above it tell their own story. Dark stains have seeped through the wood, creating patterns that speak of violence and hasty cleanup. But more disturbing is what she finds when she pries up one of the loose boards, a woman's shoe, small and delicate, with a heel worn down on one side in a way that speaks of a limp or injury. The shoe belongs to someone who walked with pain, someone who might have been trying to escape when she was caught. Martha holds it in her hands, feeling the weight of another woman's desperation, and understands that she is looking at evidence of murder. But it's the discovery in Thomas's desk that provides the most damning evidence. Hidden in a secret compartment behind the drawers, Martha finds a collection of documents that reveals the true scope of his crimes. Marriage certificates for 6 different women, all bearing Thomas's name as the groom. Death certificates for the same women, all listing causes of death that range from consumption to accidents to simple heart failure. The dates tell the story with brutal clarity. Each marriage lasts between 6 months and 2 years before the wife's convenient death. Each death is followed by a period of mourning, then a new search for a bride. The pattern has been repeating for over a decade, and Martha realizes that she is simply the latest victim in a carefully orchestrated scheme. But the most chilling discovery is a letter, written in Thomas's careful hand but never sent, addressed to a matrimonial agency in St. Louis. In it, he describes his requirements for a new wife with the clinical detachment of someone ordering livestock. Must be past childbearing age, with no close family ties, and desperate enough to accept marriage to a stranger. Previous experience with farm work preferred but not essential. Appearance should be pleasing but not so remarkable as to attract unwanted attention. Martha understands now why she was chosen, why Thomas had been willing to pay her passage and ask no questions about her past. She fits his requirements perfectly, a spinster with no prospects, no family who would miss her, and no experience with the kind of violence that awaits her in this remote valley. The next morning brings evidence that Martha's nocturnal investigations have not gone unnoticed. She wakes to find Thomas sitting in a chair beside the bed, fully dressed and watching her with eyes that hold no trace of the laudanum-induced confusion that has marked their previous interactions. "You're a curious woman." "Martha," he says, his voice carrying a conversational tone that makes her skin crawl. "I appreciate that quality in a wife up to a point." Martha sits up slowly, pulling the quilt around herself like armor. "I don't know what you mean." "Of course you do." Thomas reaches into his coat and produces Elizabeth's diary, the pages now bearing fresh fingerprints that could only have come from Martha's hands. "You've been reading about my dear departed Elizabeth. Such a tragic case, consumption," the doctor said, "though between you and me, I think it was more a matter of incompatibility. The mask has dropped completely now, revealing the predator that lurks beneath Thomas's genteel facade." Martha can see the calculation in his eyes, the way he's measuring her reactions and planning his next move. "The thing about mountain life," Thomas continues, rising from his chair with the fluid grace of someone whose illness is far less debilitating than he pretends, "is that it teaches you to be practical about survival. Weak things die, Martha. It's the natural order. What do you want from me?" Thomas's smile is cold as winter wind. "The same thing I wanted from all of them. A few months of companionship, someone to cook and clean and warm my bed, and then, well, then the mountains will claim another victim. Tragic, really, but these things happen. He moves to the window, gazing out at the valley that has become a graveyard for his victims. You see, my dear, I discovered long ago that marriage is far more profitable than farming. A wife brings a dowry, however small, and when she dies, well, there are always debts to be settled, property to be sold, assets to be liquidated. Over the years, it's provided quite a comfortable living. Martha feels the walls of the cabin closing in around her, understanding now that she is trapped not just by geography but by a carefully planned murder scheme that has been perfected through repetition. But Thomas isn't finished with his revelations. The laudanum, you see, isn't for my lungs. It's for you. He produces a small brown bottle from his pocket, the same bottle she's seen him drink from each night. A few drops in your evening tea and you become quite manageable, easier to control, less likely to cause trouble. But I'm afraid the dosage required tends to increase over time, and eventually, he doesn't need to finish the sentence. Martha understands that she is being slowly poisoned. Her death designed to look like the gradual decline of someone unable to adapt to mountain life. Just as Martha begins to formulate a plan for escape, a knock at the cabin door changes everything. Thomas's expression shifts from predatory confidence to something approaching panic, and Martha realizes that whatever is happening, it wasn't part of his carefully laid plans. The visitor is a woman, tall, angular, with graying hair and eyes that miss nothing. She introduces herself as Dr. Sarah Brennan, and her presence in this remote valley seems as unlikely as snow in summer. Mr. Whitmore, Dr. Brennan says, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I'm here about your wife. Your previous wife. Thomas's composure cracks slightly. I'm afraid I don't understand. Elizabeth passed away 5 years ago. Yes, so I've been told. Consumption, according to the death certificate you filed. Dr. Brennan's smile is sharp as a scalpel. The problem is, Mr. Whitmore, that Elizabeth Whitmore was my patient before she married you. And I can assure you that she was in perfect health when she left my care. The revelation that follows turns Martha's understanding of the situation upside down. Dr. Brennan isn't just a physician. She's a federal investigator, working with the U.S. Marshal's Office to investigate a pattern of suspicious deaths that has been traced across 3 states. Thomas Whitmore isn't just a serial killer. He's part of a larger network of men who prey on desperate women through matrimonial agencies and mail-order bride services. You see, Mrs. Whitmore, Dr. Brennan continues, her attention shifting to Martha, your husband has been quite careless about covering his tracks. 6 wives in 12 years, all dying of convenient ailments, all leaving their modest inheritances to their grieving widower. It's a pattern that tends to attract attention from people like me. But the reversal that truly shocks Martha comes when Dr. Brennan reveals the final piece of the puzzle. The woman you heard crying for help last night? She's very much alive, Mr. Whitmore, and she's been telling us some very interesting stories about your methods. The cellar door that Martha had been unable to open conceals not a grave, but a prison. Elizabeth Whitmore, the wife who supposedly died 5 years ago, has been kept captive in an underground chamber, used as leverage to ensure the compliance of subsequent wives. The crying Martha heard was Elizabeth's attempt to warn her about the fate that awaits women who displease Thomas Whitmore. You see, Thomas says, his voice now carrying a note of desperate pride, killing them immediately would be wasteful. Much better to keep them alive, use them to train their replacements, and then dispose of them when they're no longer useful. The revelation recontextualizes everything Martha thought she understood about her situation. She isn't just the latest victim in a series of murders. She's part of an ongoing system of captivity and control that has been operating for years. And Elizabeth Whitmore, the woman whose diary had revealed the truth about Thomas's nature, is still alive and suffering in the darkness beneath their feet. Dr. Brennan's presence offers Martha a chance at escape, but it comes with a price that makes her stomach clench with moral anguish. The federal investigation requires evidence that will stand up in court, and the only way to gather that evidence is for Martha to continue playing the role of the unsuspecting wife while investigators build their case. I need you to stay here, Dr. Brennan explains during a private moment while Thomas is distracted. I need you to document his methods, gather evidence of his crimes, and help us locate the other victims. It's the only way we can ensure that he faces justice for what he's done. What about Elizabeth? Martha asks. What about the woman in the cellar? She's survived 5 years. She can survive a few more weeks if it means stopping him permanently. The choice that confronts Martha is stark in its moral complexity. She can flee with Dr. Brennan and save herself, but doing so will likely result in Elizabeth's death and allow Thomas to escape justice. Or she can stay, risking her own life to gather evidence that might save future victims, but could easily result in her own death if Thomas discovers her deception. How many other women are out there? Martha asks. How many other Elizabeth Whitmores are trapped in cellars waiting for someone to save them? Dr. Brennan's expression is grim. We've identified at least 12 similar cases across Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia. This isn't just about Thomas Whitmore, Mrs. Whitmore. It's about a network of predators who have turned marriage into a hunting ground. The weight of that knowledge settles on Martha's shoulders like a physical burden. She thinks of the women who answered matrimonial advertisements with hope in their hearts, who traveled to remote locations believing they were starting new lives, only to find themselves trapped in situations that would end in death or captivity. But she also thinks of her own desperate circumstances, the poverty and desperation that had driven her to accept marriage to a stranger. How many other women are making the same choice right now, drawn by promises of security into traps they can't escape? The decision, when it comes, feels both inevitable and terrifying. Martha will stay. She will gather the evidence Dr. Brennan needs, and she will find a way to free Elizabeth Whitmore, even if it costs her own life. What do you need me to do? She asks. The plan Dr. Brennan outlines is simple in concept but terrifying in execution. Martha must continue to play the role of the naive bride while secretly documenting Thomas's crimes and gathering evidence of the broader network. But most importantly, she must find a way to access the cellar and document Elizabeth's captivity without alerting Thomas to her knowledge. The opportunity comes 3 days later, when Thomas announces that he must travel to town on business. The trip will take most of the day, giving Martha the time she needs to explore the cellar and gather evidence. But as she watches Thomas prepare for his departure, she notices something that makes her blood run cold. He's packing the small brown bottle of laudanum, along with several other vials of medicine she doesn't recognize. Planning to be gone long? She asks, trying to keep her voice casual. Thomas's smile is predatory. Just long enough to take care of some unfinished business. I'm afraid our conversation the other day has made me realize that you're not quite as malleable as I'd hoped, my dear. Perhaps it's time to accelerate our timeline. Martha understands that Thomas is planning to kill her upon his return, probably making it look like an accident or sudden illness. The realization that her time is running out adds urgency to her mission, but it also clarifies her priorities. Whatever evidence she gathers must be enough to convict Thomas and expose the network, because she may not survive to testify. The cellar, when she finally manages to break the lock, reveals horrors that exceed even her darkest imaginings. Elizabeth Whitmore is alive, but barely, emaciated, broken, her mind damaged by years of captivity and abuse. But she's lucid enough to understand that Martha represents hope, and coherent enough to provide the testimony that will damn Thomas Whitmore. He keeps records, Elizabeth whispers, her voice barely audible after years of disuse. Names, dates, methods. He's proud of what he's done, thinks he's too clever to be caught. The records Elizabeth describes are hidden in a secret compartment beneath the cellar floor, a ledger that documents not just Thomas's crimes, but the entire network of predators he's connected to. Names, addresses, methods of operation, and most damning of all, a correspondence that reveals the scope of the conspiracy. But as Martha photographs the evidence with a camera Dr. Brennan had provided, she hears the sound that signals her doom. Thomas's voice, calling her name from the cabin above. He's returned early, and from the tone of his voice, he knows exactly what she's been doing. Martha, my dear, Thomas calls, his voice carrying a false sweetness that makes her skin crawl. I think it's time we had another conversation about your curiosity. The confrontation that follows is swift and brutal. Thomas descends into the cellar with a pistol in his hand and murder in his eyes, but he's not prepared for the woman he finds waiting for him. The months of fear and desperation have transformed Martha from a desperate spinster into something harder and more dangerous, a woman who has nothing left to lose and everything to fight. For the struggle is brief but vicious. Thomas's illness, which Martha now realizes is largely feigned, still leaves him weaker than he pretends, and Martha's desperation gives her strength she didn't know she possessed. When the pistol goes off, it's Thomas who falls, his blood mixing with the dirt floor of the cellar that has been his victim's prison. But the victory comes at a cost. Martha is wounded, Elizabeth is dying from years of abuse and neglect, and the evidence that could expose the network is scattered across the cellar floor. As Martha struggles to gather the documents and help Elizabeth to safety, she realizes that her choices have consequences that extend far beyond her own survival. Dr. Brennan arrives to find Martha collapsed beside Elizabeth's body, the evidence of Thomas's crimes clutched in her blood-stained hands. The investigation that follows exposes not just Thomas Whitmore's murders, but the entire network of predators who have been using matrimonial services to hunt vulnerable women across the frontier. 12 men are arrested in the subsequent raids, and the evidence Martha gathered leads to the rescue of 7 women who were being held in similar circumstances. The matrimonial agencies that facilitated these crimes are shut down, and new federal laws are passed to protect women seeking marriage through correspondence. But the victory is bittersweet. Elizabeth Whitmore dies from her injuries before she can see justice done, and Martha herself bears scars, both physical and emotional, that will never fully heal. The land that had promised security and independence becomes a reminder of the price paid for survival in a world that offers women few choices and fewer protections. 6 months later, Martha stands in the same valley where her nightmare began, but everything has changed. The cabin has been torn down, the field sold to pay restitution to the families of Thomas's victims. The cellar has been filled in and marked with a simple stone that bears the names of the women who died there. Dr. Brennan approaches, carrying a letter that will change Martha's life once again. "The federal government is establishing a new program," she explains. "Training women to work as investigators, to help protect other women from predators like Thomas Whitmore. They've asked me to recommend candidates." Martha takes the letter, feeling its weight in her hands. The offer represents everything she's ever wanted. Independence, purpose, the chance to make a difference in a world that has shown her both its cruelest and most redemptive faces. But it also represents a choice between safety and service, between healing her own wounds and preventing others from suffering similar ones. "What about the other women?" Martha asks. "The ones who are still out there, still answering advertisements, still hoping for something better?" Dr. Brennan's smile is sad but determined. "That's exactly why we need you, Martha. You understand what they're facing because you've faced it yourself. You know the signs, the patterns, the ways these predators operate. You could save lives." Martha looks out across the valley one last time, remembering the woman who had arrived here months ago. Desperate, naive, willing to accept any promise of security. That woman is gone, replaced by someone harder and wiser. Someone who understands that true security comes not from the protection of others, but from the strength to protect oneself and those who cannot protect themselves. "When do I start?" she asks. The letter in her hands represents not just a job, but a calling, a chance to transform her own suffering into a shield for others. It won't be easy, and it won't erase the memories of what she's endured. But it will give meaning to her pain and purpose to her survival. As Martha walks away from the valley that nearly became her grave, she carries with her the knowledge that some choices define not just who we are, but who we choose to become. The test of character isn't found in the decisions we make when life is easy, but in the choices we make when everything we've believed about the world has been shattered and we must decide whether to rebuild or retreat. Martha has chosen to rebuild, not just her own life, but the lives of women who will face the same choices she faced. It's a burden and a blessing, a responsibility and a redemption. And as she disappears into the morning mist that still clings to the mountain passes, she carries with her the voices of the women who didn't survive to make that choice. Elizabeth Whitmore and all the others whose names are carved on stones in hidden valleys across the frontier. Their deaths will not be meaningless if Martha can prevent others from sharing their fate. And in that purpose, she finds something that had eluded her for 34 years. Not just security or independence, but the knowledge that her life has value beyond what any man might choose to give it. Thank you for watching this harrowing tale of survival, justice, and the strength that can be found in our darkest moments. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more tales from the American frontier. Next week, We'll explore another story of courage against impossible odds with The Schoolmarm's Secret, where a young teacher in a remote mining town discovers that education can be the most dangerous weapon of all. Until then, remember that sometimes the greatest victories come not from the battles we win, but from the choice to keep fighting when all seems lost.